Hi, good evening, everyone. Oh, it's going to disappear. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to yet another DC iOS meetup. This will probably be our last talk of the year. I'll talk about it a little later after our presentation. We might have an event in December, but this will be our last actual talk for this calendar year. So hope everyone is excited. One last talk. We've been running with UI the past few months, and now we're changing gears and talking about something which, as developers, should be important to us, which is documentation. So today's topic is going to be on DocC and Xcode 15, a guide to rich developer documentation. So welcome, thank you all for coming. I don't have any announcements as usual before, I'll do most of the announcements afterwards. So with that, I will go ahead and hand it off to our presenters, Samir and Marina. So give me a second to change to their screen view, and then we will get started.
You guys hear me well? All right. So, good evening, everyone, and welcome to Capital One. Today, we are going to talk about DocC and how to leverage all the exciting features of DocC in order to create interactive study documentation for Swift and Objective-C code. Before we deep dive into actual DocC, little bit of introduction. So, my name is Samir, and I've been with Capital One since from last 8.5 years. I started my career with Capital One in a full stack team, and now I'm in Capital One managing a team of mobile P2P payments in Capital One Bank. With me, I have my colleague Marina. Marina, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi everyone, my name is Marina. I joined Capital One 2 years ago, and now I'm currently on Samir's team working with Zell iOS.
Awesome. Thanks, Marina. So before we get into DocC, let's talk a little bit about why documentation matters. So imagine a hypothetical situation that you are on your adventurous trip to a forest, and you have been handed over a bunch of maps, bunch of documents, and you have been asked to reach to a destination, but you have no clue how to use those maps or the documents in order to reach to your destination. How will be your situation in that case? Something like this. You will be totally clueless even if you have maps because you have no idea how those maps are interconnected, how to use the information given in the documents at a particular step within the forest. And you will be totally lost in that. Your situation will not be very different when you have been assigned to a project and you are asked to do certain things with bunch of documentation given to you, and you have no idea like how those documents are interconnected and how they will build the entire story for the code base on which you are working on. So that's a typical case for any of the documentation. And there are a bunch of other challenges with the traditional documentation approach. So very first is documentation can get very easily out of sync with the code. So you write the code and developer forgot to actually update the documentation and vice versa. And because of which documentation can very easily go out of sync with what is there in the code base. Lack of interactive documentation. So as I said earlier, so there could be a lot of documentation and there could be multiple documents which are interconnected revealing a story, but since they are not connected in an appropriate way, so there is lack of interaction between those documents. Documentation scattered across multiple places, so if we do not have a harmonized way of documenting, the documentation can easily get scattered at multiple places, and we will get lost in the ocean of information. We cannot enforce document-driven development because the traditional approach is manual, and there is no enforcement that can be done on any of the gear that you are committing as far as documentation is concerned. And lack of versioning for the document. So if you create a document, we cannot easily keep track of what is there in the document versus what is there in the code, because document and the code is not in sync with each other. So we don't know when exactly the document got changed, who changed that, when exactly it got changed, all that sort of information. And majority of these challenges can be solved by using DocC. So what DocC offers is, and DocC stands for Documentation Compiler. And DocC offers to create your documentation right from your code. So your documentation and the code lives at one single place, and then you flush out your documentation right from your code. Since your documentation and code lives at one single place, so you can very well enforce document-driven development. And the reason behind that is DocC has a comprehensive support for command line tools. Since documentation and code can be easily checked in any of the version controlling tools such as Git, it can be easily version controlled. And it is very easy to share the documentation that is created with DocC, either by using web hosting. You can host it on us as a static website and share that link with your organization or the fellow developers. You can make use of Xcode documentation preview editor to share it with all the developers. Now let's look a little bit into how DocC works. So as you can see on the extreme left-hand side, the code is fed to the Swift compiler. The code as well as the libraries that are dependent on your code are fed to the Swift compiler. The Swift compiler will take out the information of all your public APIs. So I want to highlight one fact here that DocC only documents the information of your public APIs. Rest of the things which is not public will be treated as private, and DocC will not expose those APIs to the documentation. So the Swift compiler will provide information of all your public APIs to DocC, and then DocC will also make use of DocC catalog. DocC catalog is nothing but an architecture or the infrastructure for your documentation, and how to create that we will see in due course of time. So both of this information, your DocC catalog and Swift compiler, will be fed to DocC, and it will flush out DocC archive. And this is nothing but your main documentation, which you can host either as a static website or you can share as Xcode document preview editor with other developers. Now let's look into basic building blocks of DocC. Let's start with the basic one. The reference is a very basic building block of DocC. So you can treat reference as any of the entity in your project. So it could be a class, it could be a struct, and you can write beautiful documentation for any of the entity in your class, in your documentation, which could actually detail the information about what exactly that particular class or the struct is doing, what is its purpose, and you can also document information of each and every attribute within that entity. So that is about reference. You can have as many as reference documentation as you want. Now let's talk about article. Article is analogous to your module. So bunch of references will come together. And when I say reference, these are the entities in your project. They will come together and form a module. So module has a specific task, designated task, and it does something for you. So you can actually articulate everything in your article, thereby using bunch of references inside it. You can use as many as media resources such as images, videos, as well as the actual code in your article. And finally, about the tutorials. So tutorials will narrate the story of a specific thing that you want to do with your code. So, for example, if you want to create something out of your code and it has multiple steps, you can narrate that entire story to your reader through the tutorials. So tutorials are also interactive and they can make use of various media resources such as images, videos, as well as the actual code. And we will see each one of these in details in subsequent slides. With that, I will be handing it over to my colleague Marina, who will be walking you through all the technical details of 3 building blocks. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thanks, Samir. Now let's take a deep dive into the technical details of DocC. So first, I'm going to go over a high-level overview of some of the cool features that DocC offers. In Xcode 15, DocC now has the ability to give us the ability to document public extensions, and there are also various DocC directives, and we'll go over a couple of these directives in the next couple of slides. But essentially, sorry, there's like feedback. Essentially, these directives can give us a great amount of creativity to style and format our documentation. So we're able to create a grid layout using rows and columns. We're able to add tabs with the tab navigator, and we're also able to adjust the color scheme as well as like page images with metadata. And we're also able to add links and videos and so much more using these directives. And DocC now provides the ability for us to preview our documentation in real time. So this means that while we're working on Xcode and our documentation on the left-hand side, we can immediately see our changes on the right-hand side. And as Samir mentioned, DocC also has out-of-the-box hosting capabilities, making it very easy for developers to publish and host their documentation onto servers such as GitHub Pages. And while hosting and deploying your documentation, you can also customize the theme of your documentation website by editing a simple JSON file. So you can adjust things such as the color scheme or the font family. And finally, DocC has very powerful browsing and navigation capabilities, making it super easy for our readers to search through the documentation and gain a holistic understanding of what your project is about. So with that, now that we can look forward to using some of these really cool DocC features, let's start working with DocC. So DocC provides a documentation catalog. This catalog is a place to store all your documentation assets and files. And to add a catalog to your project, you just have to right-click your project, select Add a New File, and then select Documentation Catalog. Then to build and view your documentation, you just have to go to the Xcode menu, select Product, and then select Build Documentation. So let's take a look at how this works with our sample project, Sloth Creator. So go ahead and go to Xcode. And this is Sloth Creator, which is a package created by Apple. And it basically allows you to customize and catalog cute little sloths. So here, as you can see, we already have a lot of documentation built out for us. And we can go ahead and see how that looks like. Also, before we go ahead and view our documentation, notice on the left-hand side, this little symbol is actually a documentation catalog. So your documentation catalog should have the same name as your project name. And you can see that there are lots of documentation files already on here. So let's go ahead and build and view it. So I'm going to go to Product and then select Build Documentation. And in a couple of seconds, this will open up my documentation window. So in the navigation bar, I can expand Sloth Creator and see all the different documentation files and an overview of what we can expect for this documentation. So I'm going to go ahead and select the main documentation file, and this gives me a high-level overview of what my project is about. Scrolling down, I can see all the different protocols and structs that are contained in my package. So for example, if I were a reader that were curious about what types of food a sloth would eat, I can go ahead and select the food struct. And this gives me more details about what sloths eat, as well as like a function to call to make my sloth consume this food. I can also use the search bar at the top to search for food, and this will bring up all my relevant hits for food in my Sloth Creator documentation. And so this generate food function looks pretty interesting. So clicking on this, now I know that there's a function out there I can call to generate a food object. All I have to do is give it the habitat parameter. So now that we're walking through this comprehensive documentation, we're gaining a better sense of how Sloth Creator works. We know about its different public APIs and how the types work together. So while we're building and working on our documentation in Xcode, sometimes we don't want to wait for our documentation to build, especially if we're working in a huge code base where it would take a couple of minutes rather than seconds to build our documentation. So to do this, we can go to Editor Options, select the Assistant, and in the jump bar, we can go ahead and click on the Documentation Preview. So here, as you can see, while I'm working on my documentation, I can view how that looks like immediately. So now that we know how to build and view our documentation, let's go ahead and write it using references. So DocC encourages us to continue using our coding best practices by using code comments. But now they give us the capability to turn our code comments into beautiful documentation. So we can do this using triple forward slashes. And as you can see, with the triple forward slashes, we're able to associate our code comment directly with the code symbol declaration underneath it. So for this to work, the code symbol must be public. Then so let's take a look at this example at the bottom here. We're documenting the food struct. And here I'm using my triple forward slashes. And the first line in my code comments will always be the summary. And you can view the summary here, right underneath the header of our documentation page. Then every subsequent line right after the first line is going to be in your overview or discussion section. So here I have a short little paragraph about what sloths love to eat, and you can see this paragraph right in the overview. In addition, we're also able to reference other food types and provide links to them by using the double backtick syntax. So here I'm referencing twig, regular leaf, and large leaf. These are all variables in my file, so I'm able to directly reference them. So as you can see in the preview, the different food types are highlighted in blue. This indicates that I'm able to select them and view more details about those food types. So as you can see, by using source comments and references, we're able to build a very interactive experience for our readers as they're able to go from one documentation page to the next. Now that we know a lot more about these references and source comments, let's go ahead and try it out in our sample project. So here in the sloth struct, I have a function called sleep, and I want to add some documentation for it. So first, I'm going to go ahead and open up my preview. To do that, I'll go to Editor Options. I will go to Assistant, and then in my jump bar, make sure that Documentation Preview is selected. Now to view the sleep function in the documentation part, I just have to click on it. And there we go. We can see our documentation preview for sleep. So as you can see, there's already something there, and that's because DocC automatically generates documentation for every public symbol in our code base. But it's pretty basic documentation because we just have the method header here. So let's go ahead and add some code comments. Now, before we get started, let's talk about what are the best practices to document a function. First, we need to document the summary of the function. In this case, this is the sleep function, which allows our sloths to sleep in a specified habitat for a set number of hours. Then we need to add a description for our parameters. And finally, we need to add our description for the return value. So that actually sounds like a lot of typing. And to make this process a lot quicker and easier, I can leverage Xcode's add documentation functionality. To do so, I'm going to right click on sleep and then click add documentation. And it builds a wonderful template for us to get started with documenting this function. So the first thing I'm going to add is a summary of what my function does. So in the first line here, I'll go ahead and type that. And as you can see, my summary has populated in the summary section in the preview. Then for the parameters, I'll go ahead and fill that out. But also notice the syntax looks pretty familiar. The parameters is just a markdown list. And that's because DocC has full support for markdown syntax. So I'm able to include markdown in my code comments and have that reflected in my documentation page. So I'll go ahead and fill out the description for these parameters. And there we go. My parameters has been fully populated and it looks pretty good on my documentation page. Then I'll go ahead and add my return description, which is just the energy level. And now I have all the basic documentation for this function. Now I actually want to add some additional context surrounding how the energy level gets accumulated. So I want to add this in my discussion section. And to do that, you just have to add subsequent lines right after your first line, and they will go in your overview or discussion section. So here, I'm going to add a description about the energy level. And there we go. We have our description in the discussion section. Next, I actually want to add a code snippet to tell my users how to call this sleep function. To do that, I'll go ahead and use the markdown code block with a double or triple ticks. And because it's Swift code, I'll says Swift here, and then I'll add in my code example. This will be in the forest habitat for 6 hours. And perfect. You can see your code example has been populated in the discussion section. And the last thing I want to do is I actually want to include a reference to the energy level as well as the habitat's comfort level. And again, to do that, I'm just going to use my double backticks. So energy level is already in this file, so we can directly reference it. And there we have our reference to energy level. Now, habitat's comfort level is a little bit different because the comfort level is in a different file in a different struct. So we just need to be a little bit more specific when referencing it. So to do that, I will use my double backticks, then I'll call the habitat struct, /, and then call comfort level. Now it's pretty simple. So now I have all this method. Everything looks pretty good. And not only do these code comments appear in our documentation page, but you can also see it in the quick help. So if I were to right click my sleep function, select show quick help, I can see all the documentation that I've built out for this function. I can even click on energy level or comfort level, and this will take me to my documentation preview for those variables. So these references and code comments, they make a very cool experience for a new developer who wants to get started in your code base. And in addition to creating documentation with source comments and references, we can also create supplemental content, such as articles. Articles are a really great way to provide more context and a high-level overview about what your project is about. So to create an article, we can use very basic Markdown syntax and a couple of DocC directives. Now, I mentioned DocC directives in the beginning of this presentation, but they're essentially a way to enhance our articles, which goes beyond the capabilities of Markdown. In addition, we're also able to organize our documentation by using a special section called topics. You can think of this topic section as like a table of contents where you can include links to other pages in your documentation. So let's take a look at this article here. Now, the syntax should be pretty familiar since most of it is written in Markdown. So starting from the top, I have a header for my article, then I have a summary describing what the article is about, and I have an overview section along with a short description. And then underneath that, I have a very special symbol, which is this @video, and this is a DocC directive. Every DocC directive will have an @ symbol indicating it's a directive. So this directive allows me to insert a video straight into my article. Then I have a localization section with a basic paragraph, and then underneath that I have an image. Images in DocC are notated with this syntax. It starts off with an exclamation point, square brackets surrounding the description of the image, and then I have parentheses wrapping around the name of my image file. And then finally, I have my topic section. So this is where I'm going to be linking other supplemental resources, which are just pages in my documentation. You can have as many subgroups in your topic section as you want. In this case, I just have one, which is called Essentials, and I have 2 pages linked here. The first one is an article. To link an article, you will use this exact syntax. You'll have a lesson sign, doc, colon, and then the name of your article followed by a greater than sign. And then the second link I have is a reference, and this should be pretty familiar because we just used it, but it works the same exact way. This is how we're able to link code symbols and references directly into your article. So here I'm referencing the sloth struct. This was the struct that I was working in earlier. And now that we know the basics to creating an article, let's talk about a couple of DocC directives. So the first directive I want to talk about is Tab Navigator. This is a way that we can insert tabs into our article. So in this example below, I have a tab navigator with 3 tabs, and you can insert any sort of content you want in these tabs, but in this case, I have some images. And then lastly, you need a title for each tab for it to compile. The next directives I want to talk about are rows and columns. This helps us achieve a grid layout within our articles. So here I have one row with 2 nested columns. So in the first column, I have a paragraph, and then in the second column, I have an image. Now notice that the paragraph is wider than the image, and that's because I've set the size of the column to 2 giving it priority over my image within the row. So now that we know about a couple of DocC directives and we know how to build an article, let's go ahead and create one. So going back to Xcode, I want to create an article about a sample application I have. And this application will use my Sloth Creator library, and it's essentially an app that will allow me to customize and take care of some sloths. It also has some localized content to support different languages. So remember how I mentioned the documentation catalog in the beginning, and the documentation catalog will include all our static assets as well as our documentation files that are other than our source comments. So my article will belong into this catalog. So I will right-click it and select new file. Then I will add an article, and I'm going to call this article Slothy Sample. Great, so now you can see a template to get started with our article. And since our preview hasn't updated, I'm going to just reopen that. And there we go, we have our preview for the article. So starting with the summary, I'm just going to describe what my application is about. And we can see our summary has populated in the header section. And now in the overview section, I'm going to add a short description about my Slothy application. And we have our description there. And next, I want to insert a video to showcase how my Slothy application works. So to do that, I'm going to add a video directive. So here I use my video directive, and let's talk about the parameters. But here, the first parameter I have is poster. And this allows me to insert a video cover, which is just an image. And then the next parameter is source. And this is where I'm going to insert the name of my video file. And then I have my alternative text to describe the video as well as the image. Now I can also play the video in the preview, which I thought was pretty neat. I'll go ahead and pause that. And you can also find your video file and your image file and any static assets you want in your documentation inside the resources folder. It doesn't matter where in the resources folder it is, as long as it's there. So here inside documentation art, I have my Slothy Hero poster and my Slothy Hero. Now moving on to the next paragraph, I want to add a description about how our users can customize and add a power for their slots. So I'll go ahead and add a paragraph about that right underneath my video. And we can see our paragraph. And next, I'm going to add an image to showcase all my different powers. And there it is. And again, the image syntax is pretty simple. The exclamation point, square brackets surrounding the image description, and parentheses around the image name. Now you can find the image again in the same resources folder. In this case, it is Slothy Power Picker here, and it's just going to include your image name. It's not going to include any other description. In this case, this is the @2x is just the size of the image. And now that we have that, I'm going to add another paragraph describing how you can take care of your sloth. And finally, an image to showcase the different ways you can take care of your sloth. Okay, great. So this is all the content I want in my overview section. Now let's move on to the next section, which is about our localized content. So I'll go ahead and change my section header here to localization. And I'm going to add a short description describing my localized content. And finally, I'm going to add 3 images to show all the localized content we have for each language we support, which is English, Chinese, and Spanish. So that is all the content I want to display in my article. Things are looking pretty good, but as I'm scrolling through, there's so much vertical content in this, and I definitely think we can improve this using some of the DocC directives we've learned. So again, those directives were rows, columns, and the tab navigator. So in my overview section, I wanted to associate my paragraph with the image. And to make this better, I think if we put the paragraph alongside the image using rows and columns, it could be a lot more interesting to read. So I'll go ahead and use the row and column directive to insert 1 row with 2 columns. And then in the first column, I'm going to insert my paragraph. And in the second column, I'll add my image. Great. Now I'll go ahead and do the same thing for the paragraph and image below. And I'll switch it up this time by adding the image first and then the paragraph. Okay, cool. So here we have a little grid with our paragraph, image, and the same thing for the second row. Now I want to increase the size of my paragraph so it's easier for my readers to read the paragraph. And to do that, we have to set the size of the column. So here I can add a size parameter to 2, and this increases the width of my paragraph. And I'll go ahead and copy that for the second row. And great, the overview section is complete. And now I'll move on to the localization section. So here I just have 3 images. And I think we can use the tab navigator in this case. So it makes it easier for our readers to click through each image and understand the content that they're seeing. So I'm going to go ahead and use a tab navigator and add in 3 tabs. Then for each tab, I'm going to go ahead and add in each image. Nice. And now we're just missing the titles for the tabs. So the first one is English, and Chinese, and then Spanish. And there we go. We have our tabs and we're able to click through each one and see all the different localized content. So our article is looking so much better with the help of DocC directives. We're able to turn this article from something that was a little bit boring to something that's more interesting and dynamic for our readers. And that concludes the article section, and I will pass it off to Samir to go over tutorials.
Thanks, Marina. So the last component of DocC is tutorial. So as I mentioned earlier, so tutorial is nothing but number of comprehensive steps that will define how to exactly use your software. And as I mentioned earlier, each of the steps in the tutorial can be associated with multiple images, videos, as well as the code itself. So there are a bunch of directives that are available even with the tutorial. So one of the basic directive with the tutorial is add the right tutorial, which takes time as a parameter, which is nothing but the time that is required to complete your tutorial, which is like tentative time that is required to complete this tutorial. Each of the tutorial can have multiple sections. In this particular case, I can have a section for creating the basics law as my first section, and the second section could be customizing that law when it is created. And each of the section can have multiple steps within itself under the steps directive, as you can see on the right hand side. So, and each of the steps in your tutorial can be associated either with the code or with the video or with the image. And that way you can make your tutorial interactive and more and more interesting. So in order to see tutorial in action, let's try to go ahead and edit the tutorial. So this is an example of the existing tutorial. I'm going to go ahead and add an additional step in this. So as of now, as you can see, there are 7 steps in this tutorial. And we are going to add the 8th one. So this step, at 7 step, we have created a slot, and in the 8th step, we are going to add pods to our slot. I'm going to go ahead, close the editor, and reopen it again so that it will start showing the 8th step that we just have created. Awesome. Now, as you can see, all the powers of the slot are being displayed, and the tutorial is complete for this particular step. As you can see the step carefully, each of the steps has some information about what exactly it does, and also it has information about it has some name, and the name associated with the code file that will show up right at the top section here. And also it will have reference to one of the code file. This is the code file from which this code is being taken up for adding pods to the slot. And this is an alternative text for the image that we are going to display as a result of this step. Once the tutorial is completed, it can be shared with all the fellow developers, thereby compiling your entire documentation. So in order to compile, you can go into the product and say build documentation. Once it gets built, we can very well go ahead and access our documentation in the documentation preview editor and share that with the developers. However, sharing this with the developers is not an intuitive way. So there is another way, and another way is to display everything in a hosted website. So we have already hosted this website as a static website on GitHub pages, and as you can see, there are only 7 steps here because we haven't yet pushed our code to the GitHub pages yet. So let's go ahead and push our latest changes to GitHub. In order to do that, we have created a sample script, and this script will do all the necessary steps that are required in order to push our documentation to the GitHub pages. I will see what exactly that script is doing in the back. So this script is basically using all the command line tools that DocC supports. So there are 2 steps that are necessary in order to host your documentation on GitHub. The first step is to generate the DocC archive. In order to generate the DocC archive, you're going to call Xcode build doc build command. Once this command is executed properly, it's going to spit out DocC archive. The DocC archive will have everything that is needed in order to create your documentation. And this DocC archive is something that you can share with other developers as an Xcode document review editor, or you can pass it on as an input to the second command, which is xcrun process archive and space transform for static hosting. The DocC archive that you have created in the first step will be given as an input to the second step, and it will generate all the static assets for your website, and then it will be hosted either on GitHub or on any of the preferred hosting container. And since it is entirely driven by some certain commands and can be backed inside any of the script, so it can be embedded in your CI/CD flow, and you can enforce document-driven development. Now let's see where exactly our script is right now. So as you can see, the script has completed its execution. Now let's go ahead and try to access our script in the browser. So I have to access it in the incognito mode because sometimes it accesses the static contents. So I'm going to go ahead and try to access it. And it takes a little while for our changes to reflect on GitHub. Let's try to refresh. It takes a little while, but we will come back to it in some time. But this is how the GitHub pages are posted. There are certain changes that you need to make in your GitHub pages in order to host your website on GitHub. So if you have to go to the settings page, click on the settings page, go to the pages, select the branch from which you have to host your website on GitHub, and then click on save. Once you click on the save button, you should be able to get the square at the top, which has link to your GitHub and a link to your hosted website. And once you click on that, you should be able to see all your hosted website. So I'm going to go ahead and see if my changes are reflected now in our website. All right, I'm going to close the browser and open it again. There you go. So our next step is now showing up in our GitHub pages. So all our contents that we have generated on our local are now pushed onto the GitHub, and now it started showing up the step 8 that we just have created for showing all the powers of our slot. So that's how the entire documentation can be hosted on any of the GitHub. I think I have closed my presentation slides. Can you help me with this? There you go. So with that, This is end of the entire presentation. These are all the references that we have used for creating this documentation and presentation. And we are now open for the questions.
Yep. So when you do that documentation generation by building it, which of the files are generated for then hosting? Like, is that getting started page automatically generated for you?
Yes, so it actually flushes out all the HTML contents, and that HTML contents will get hosted on your preferred container. So as of now, container for us is GitHub pages on which we are hosting our entire website, and those are essentially all HTML and static assets like images, videos, and
Yeah, just to add to that, the getting started page is a separate documentation file. So we actually created that in the background, and that's how you're able to see it. So that wasn't something that was automatically there.
Okay.
It's something that you have to add and create.
Is there any way to use DocC with Objective-C?
yes, it supports both Swift as well as Objective-C.
When you talk about document-driven development, can you tell us a little more about that? Like, are you saying that you would be able to set up your pipeline where if you didn't have documentation, it would be, you would be able to check in your code, or what do you mean
Yeah.
by document-driven development?
Yeah, so basically, the script that I have shown you, it basically gets triggered. It could get triggered as a part of your CI/CD pipeline. And in that CI/CD pipeline, we can do everything right from generating your documentation and then hosting it on any of the static assets. So as and when you check in your code, we can just execute that script and it could generate all the static assets and host it on any of the website. In that script, we can actually ensure that all the documentation is also included and that will be hosted on your website. So entire flow can be automated. You don't have to do anything extra in order to host your website. So it will be the part of the entire CI/CD pipeline. Yeah.
So when it comes to like all of this documentation, when you're going to release your application, how do you does that code get released with your binaries, or how do you separate that?
So your DocC, you want to take it, Marina? So your DocC catalog will get checked in as a part of this documentation, and it has got all the contents. But when you actually deploy, say your build, you can actually customize it and then get rid of all the DocC catalogs from your final APK file or the IPA file that you are actually going to release to the App Store.
Question from Franklin in the chat. Are there any challenging aspects or difficulties associated with DocC?
The main challenge that we had was with the script. So it has got a number of parameters that we had to really figure out, like which parameters are going to get passed in. There is not much documentation that is available in regards to what parameters are necessary. We have to make some research on it and then embed that entire logic into the shell script, and then we were able to host it. Apart from that, everything was pretty straightforward, and there is a lot of information available on Apple's website, as well as there are a lot of videos on WWDC, which gives comprehensive information about how to create the documentation. One more thing I want to highlight here, in order to use all the features that we demonstrated just now, like for example, tab layout or the grid layout, like 2-column layout, 3-column layout, you will have to have Xcode 15 with you. If you don't have Xcode 15, if you are on the prior version of Xcode, you won't be able to leverage all these features.
You're also only able to document public code symbols. So if you had like a private repository with private code symbols, you might not be able to document that with DocC.
Yeah. So anything that is not public, which will be omitted. And on top of that, there is one more limitation for the DocC that we observed. Like if there is any, there are certain things that you won't be necessarily willing to document. But as of now, there is no way that you can omit certain things from the documentation. So whatever is public, it will just grab it and start documenting it. There has been certain links which we haven't experimented yet, but there are certain directives which says underscore at the rate and then omit or something, which will actually exclude that code from getting included into the documentation. But as of now, it pulls out everything which is public and start documenting.
Just a note, if you're asking a question here, please make sure to speak up because not all the questions are getting captured by the mic. Are there any other questions?
Right? Nothing else. And that's it. Thank you so much, guys.
Thank you. All right, let's quick wrap up and then we will be done for tonight. All right, so as usual, if you're interested. All right, as usual, if you're interested in speaking, we have the link to the form. I can send it out over Meetup again. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. We will probably have this recording up in about a week or two, depending on my schedule. We still have our Mastodon, which I am not really good about updating, as usual. And then finally, for people who want them who are here, we have stickers. So with that, looking ahead, as I kind of alluded to earlier, so next month, most likely we will not have, as I said, we will not have an actual meetup. I need to talk to my other co-organizers with DC Android, DC Flutter, GDC. We are considering kind of having like a holiday event. So that means that will obviously, unfortunately, be an in-person only event. So if we are doing that, keep an eye out. It'll be probably early mid-December. Once we've kind of been and talked about the logistics of it, we'll publish that information on Meetup. But going back to our talks, in January, we will be back to our usual hybrid format. The room I've been waiting for us at Capital One to be available is finally available to us. It was actually getting its AV completed and set it up today. So we will be able to use that nice new space in January. And on January, we will have Craig Clayton come and talk to us about going from iOS to Vision OS, a Swift UI developer's blueprint for design excellence. That will be early January. Again, we'll put that on Meetup closer to that time. And with that, thank you everybody for coming. Have a good Thanksgiving holiday and hope everyone has a good rest of the year. And for those who aren't in this area, we will see you next year.